Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me as always. Really excited to have back on the show. It's a summer tradition, Mr. Matt Williamson. Matt, welcome back to the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast.
Thank you so much. This is fun every year. I'm psyched to dig in, and we got training camp like right around the corner here. I was just telling you, I got a vacation, and then I'm moving into Sealer camp in the dorms with the players and coaches, and man, it's time to roll.
Yeah, it's that time of the year now. Here at Saturday Sunday, we're kind of wrapping up talking about these rookies, and then we start to make the transition, start watching the film to get ready for the next college football season and the next draft cycle, and so on and so forth as we do it here. But before we get there, I love always picking your brain in terms of your opinion on these rookies, how they might translate, long-term view, immediate production, stuff like that. So let's jump right into it. And, I haven't had a chance to hear your takes on some of these quarterbacks, obviously a very star-studded quarterback class. So maybe just your takes in terms of, obviously we had Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels, Drake May at the tippy top of this draft. How quickly, in terms of fantasy, do you have a clear preference for year one? Are you taking the running guy? Are you taking the guy with the ideal setup like Caleb Williams? Maybe a little bit about Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels, year one production, or then long-term, if you had to pick one of them for fantasy, where might you lie?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good conversation, and obviously we could do a whole podcast just on that. And I don't have super high hopes for Nix, but I think he's going to come in and be efficient and looks like he belongs. And, that doesn't mean that he's a massive fantasy asset or anything like that, but I was picking him up pretty cheap in Superflex leagues and pretty happy about it because I think he's going to last. I really have high hopes or a lot of expectations for the Viking coaching staff. I think that's a really good environment for a young quarterback to go. And at my age, doing this as long as I have, I'm almost more concerned with landing spot than the actual player at this position. I always call it the nest. I mean, if you fall out into a nice soft landing spot, a nice nest, I think there's a really good chance that the bird actually hatches and flies away, But some of these guys, the nest's on fire, and I think New England, the nest might be on fire. And I love Drake May. He was my number 2 quarterback in the real world, not necessarily for fantasy, but I worry that staff, that situation, the lack of stuff around him could really slow him down, especially early on. I don't expect much at all this year. But in the redraft world, I've been targeting Jayden Daniels quite a bit. I mean, the line in Washington worries me quite a bit. But they run a ton of plays in that offense, and his running skills are extreme. That's the key to me. His weapons are good enough. I do worry about durability, but in the fantasy world, I'm kind of cocky about injuries that, okay, if someone gets hurt, I'll just find someone after him, but I think he's set up to have the best rookie year, for fantasy.
Yeah, and then when you're talking, if you had to pick one between him and Caleb Williams, more long-term, do you still favor the guy who we know is going to be more explosive in the running, or do we favor the guy that might be the more complete player, complete passer in Caleb Williams if you had to pick between those two?
In dynasty and long term, I'm still taking Williams. I hesitate to say he's a special prospect. I mean, that's not fair. Trevor Lawrence is dealing with that now, that he's merely really good and not a superstar. That's that. But I do think Williams is the first pick in the draft almost any year he comes out. I really like his anticipation, the way he sees the field, his playmaking skills, all of his talent. I think his situation's quite good. What I'm a little uncertain of is how much do we think he's going to run in the league? I mean, I'm kind of guessing he might be like a Mahomes type runner, when the time comes situationally, probably not designed a lot for him, where Daniels will probably far eclipse him on the ground.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with that. I could see maybe a little bit early career Dak Prescott, Andrew Luck when he was in. Those are probably – I don't think we're going to get more than that from Caleb Williams, who's going to want to play within the structure of the offense and then make things happen when he needs to. The one first-round quarterback that didn't come up there, and understandably so, is Michael Penix Jr., obviously waiting in the wings there for Atlanta. Maybe some quick thoughts on, did you like Penix at all as a prospect, as that traditional pocket passing quarterback? so maybe some takes on Penix. Is he a guy that obviously in Dynasty you have to, he's just got to be looked at as a stash? Do you think he's even worth it in that regards? Like waiting it out to see when he gets that opportunity? Does it kind of tie into what you thought of him as a prospect, of whether or not you're even willing to play that game of kind of wait it out?
It's a tough one. I mean, it's like when Jordan Love got drafted, or, it's a real similar situation, because I do like the prospect. I love the way he throws the football. I'm not implying it's going to be a Mahomes, Alex Smith situation, but one of the reasons I wouldn't have made the pick if I was Atlanta is when you go to practice every day, when you're with a team like I was, you go to practice every day, everyone at practice can see who the more talented guy is. And if Penix is just ripping apart your scout team or throwing balls the cousin won't even try, that's kind of what happened with Kansas City with Smith versus Mahomes his rookie year. It's just really hard to keep those guys on the bench. And considering Cousins' age, I could see him not being a Falcon next year. And if so, I want to get in on the ground floor on Penix, so I don't mind having him wait a year or even two. And the guys like, some of us that had Jordan Love in Dynasty, that was a long, excruciating wait. You couldn't cut him. You couldn't really move him, but you're pretty happy about it now. And I know he ran really well at his pro day, but I don't know that Penix is ever going to be a high-end runner.
Yeah, and it's really one of those interesting things because, obviously there's been no situation ever like this before, that a team invested in a free agent and then did this the same year. Like you brought up Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes. That was a scenario where at least Kansas City looked at Alex Smith and was like, this guy has brought us to the playoffs. Like he's done things for us. Like here, the Falcons fans have no attachment to Kirk Cousins. They were excited when they signed him, but
neither does the locker room. That's what worries me. This guy's gonna be coming back from injury, limping along, and then the locker room's gonna be like, "Are you our guy or not?" That's my big worry about it. Yeah.
Like if he starts at 1-3 with no attachment to the fans, are they going to be calling for Penix right away? Probably. That's how fandom works. Basically, they're going to want to see the guy who was the 8th overall pick, who was already ready to play. This isn't a developmental prospect. Like we know Drake May's got some development, and I like him, like you. We know JJ McCarthy, but Penix was ready to kind of step in and play. So it's such a weird dynamic that they went that route. I just felt like it opened up so many question marks for them. But we'll see how it turns out, because I do like the player like you with Michael Penix. Let's shift this over to some
last note on him, though. I bet the more I haven't given this a lot of thought lately, but I think the more we talk through this, the more I think Penix will see the field. If there was an over-under in Vegas of when his official first start is, middle of next year, whatever it is, I'm going to take earlier. Whatever it is, I would take the earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a real likelihood they trade Cousins next year, unless maybe they get back maybe they get back a second round pick or whatever. If a team, if he shows that he's healthy enough, I'm sure they can. Teams are always in demand for quarterbacks, but I'd almost be surprised. Like I almost think it would take like an 11-win season and maybe a playoff win for Cousins to still be the quarterback. And that's asking for a lot. Yeah. Atlanta's got a decent roster, and I think they'll make strides this year and be in the mix there to win the NFC South. But it's such a weird thing that we've never seen done before. It's going to be interesting to kind of see itself play out. Let's take this to some running back discussion.
Green Bay, it's not the same as Mahomes, as you said.
No, yeah,
that's a totally different world.
Yeah, because those teams had that attachment to the quarterback. They were more willing to wait it out. Like even in New York, like when they drafted Daniel Jones, like Eli, there was still this waiting out understanding that like, okay, like we kind of, we're going to give him the precedence to be the guy first. And then when the time comes, but here it's just not there. Like there's no and which makes it such a different dynamic. Let's spin this over to the running back conversation. Okay. And let's start with Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson. They were a lot of people's 1-2 film evals going into the draft. Were those the guys that you like the most in this running back class? And if so, were you more intrigued with the Carolina landing spot or the Arizona landing spot?
They definitely were my top two, without question. I think Brooks in a vacuum is the much better prospect. I think he's just an all-around better ball carrier, receiver, fluid athlete, and would have gone noticeably higher, maybe even round 1 if he were a clean prospect. I don't think his landing spot is bad, especially after they invested in guards. I mean, that's something that teams with short quarterbacks often do, is go solidify the interior O-line. I do think the O-line went from terrible to okay. And as a rule of thumb, I'm not big from an NFL perspective of investing early picks in running backs for the most part. But if you have a young, struggling quarterback, I can see it more often. Like I think Brooks could quickly become Young's best friend. I'm just going to dump it to him. I'm going to hand him the ball. One play, I don't have to worry about things. So I do like his situation. Of course, there's the caveat of when are we going to see him on the field, actually. But I've invested in him pretty heavily in the rookie drafts. I don't have a problem with Benson. I give Connor credit for hanging on as long as he has. I mean, a lot of the backs from his class, that was that historic running back class. But like, I thought Mixon and Kamara and some of those other guys really started to show their age last year that he was drafted with. And I didn't think Connor did. And trust me, as a Steeler guy, I never thought he'd be the one that's held on longer than those dudes. But I do think Arizona's quickly turning into a really good landing spot for both him and Harrison, really. I mean, everyone forgets this, but like this time last year, everyone's talking about how, Caleb Williams is going to end up in Arizona. They're the worst team in the league. What are they going to do with Kyler Murray? They have no talent whatsoever, because they had no talent whatsoever. I mean, and now that they've invested in linemen and Kyler Murray's healthy, I thought that coaching staff, which I thought was kind of an afterthought when they signed him, I'm like, nobody wants a Carolina job. They're just signing these guys. I thought they really outkicked their coverage despite not having very good players. I mean, the schemes were good. The running game was diverse. So I want to invest in Cardinals kind of on the ground floor right now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Benson was a guy that, I'm in on high, and I think he's even going a little bit later in rookie drafts than I anticipated. I think because he has that round 3 draft capital, even though it was the top of the round 3. I just feel like there's like almost like this mental thing when people see round 3, they kind of like ding it a little bit when that round 2 makes you feel a little bit warm and cozy. And I feel like that's kind of happening there a little bit with Trey Benson. Let's take it to the next 2 running backs, Blake Corum and Marshawn Lloyd. I got 2 questions for you. One, your background in scouting. I feel like these guys are an interesting dynamic because I feel like Marshawn Lloyd has all the physical traits better than a guy like Blake Corum, but then all the running traits, the instincts, the vision, the stuff like that goes to Blake Corum. How did you kind of lie in deciphering these two? And then the second part you can kind of lean right into is, who do you think's got a better chance to eat into the current starters' workload quicker or bigger this year? Is it Blake taken from Kyron or Marshawn taken from Jacobs?
That's a good conversation too, because I don't feel super strong about one versus the other, but I do want to talk it through in that I know he's not the same draft class, but I thought Josh Jacobs, much like I mentioned with Mixon and Kamara, started to show signs of age. Like I didn't approve of that signing by Green Bay. I think he's a 1-year rental. I thought he was declining last year. I think AJ Dillon might not even make the team. He has no special teams value whatsoever. So I see a path for Lloyd to get a lot of touches soon. But I think I'm sure most of your listeners know this, but if a young back can't get on the field, it's almost always because ball security or pass protection. And I don't trust Lloyd in either one of those categories yet. So he's going to have to really prove it to the coaching staff in, training camp, preseason. Hey, I'm picking up the right blitzer. I'm sticking my face in there. I can hold on to the football. So if we see those things in preseason, I'm going to get even more bullish on him because I do like his ability. I think Corum, coming from Michigan, is going to do all those little things. And sort of like we just talked about with Green Bay, I'm not impressed with Kyron Williams as a player. I mean, I thought he's easy to root for. He's great in protection, a team captain at Notre Dame, all those good things. But I think he's a very pedestrian athlete / running back that would not be the starter for most teams in the league. And that situation's so good. So I'm guessing Corum eats into Williams more early, but I do think Lloyd is the higher ceiling.
Yeah, I think you bring it up, like his ball security was a major issue in college. And we know he puts the ball on the ground week 1. We might not see him in much of a significant role for quite some time. He really needs to take care of the football early in his career to kind of put that in the rear view mirror for a little while, and it not something that immediately gets brought to the forefront, as something that we know coaches prioritize like crazy. And it's gonna be interesting, but I'm right there with you. I was talking on the last episode. If you go down a checklist, what besides pass receiving, what checklist does Kyron Williams have over Blake Corum? Probably nothing. Like if you're going
Probably
a
not.
natural
Right.
like scouting checklist, this, Blake Corum probably checks off the box on his side more than Kyren Williams for every trade except maybe receiving capabilities. So it's going to be interesting to see how long he could kind of fend off, how long Kyren Williams can kind of hold off Blake Corum for kind of eating into that. And I agree with you. That Josh Jacobs contract, if anybody's under the impression it's a long-term deal, it's not. You go to any of those websites, that break down the contracts, it says right after 24, I can get out. And it's basically a 1-year deal. And I don't even expect Jacobs back with Green Bay next year. They'll probably invest somebody else, maybe to pair with Marshawn Lloyd. But I think it's very much a 1-year deal and kind of see, unless he has a great year and maybe they keep him for another year or so and go from there. After those 4 running backs, obviously Jalen Wright.
I'm a little shocked those two are a little. They're also going a smidge later in rookie drafts than I would think, because it's not much in front of them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are struggling where to put those two, Corum and Lloyd, in relation to those late round 1, early round 2 wide receivers. I think that's where the dynamic is. Because if you start putting Keon Coleman and Ricky Purcell and Xavier Leggett and Lat McConkey and those guys all ahead of these running backs, well, then all of a sudden in the Superflex league, you have guys like Blake Corum and Marshawn Lloyd going like 17 or 18, because of all these other quarterbacks and then these wide receivers getting pushed up the board. So I've gotten myself a lot of Marshawn Lloyd just because he's kind of fallen into that sweet spot. And I do look at the opportunity being pretty substantial there in Green Bay. So yeah, I agree with you. Falling a little bit further than usual, I think. Just a weird year with all those receivers going so high and so many quarterbacks in round 1 as well. Jalen Wright, for most people, is that number 5 guy, kind of waiting in the wings there at Miami, Devin Achane, Raheem Mostert. But I'm always fascinated with hearing people's takes after that, because last couple episodes I've had Danny Kelly of The Ringer, I've had Dave Richard of CBS, and I always ask him, like, okay, after that top 5, I look at my list of like 6 to 13. I feel like you can make an argument ranking them any which way you want, and nobody's really more right than wrong. You can make a really strong argument. So what about for you? Like, who are the guys either you've ended up with a bunch in rookie drafts, you like the most on film, you like the depth chart? I mean, obviously I don't have to rattle off all the names. Ray Davis, Tyrone Tracy, Vidal, Esteme, Shipley, Irving, Garendo, Ali, Allen, all these other guys. Is there a couple that kind of stand out that these are the guys you're either ending up with a lot or you like the most on film or whatever?
Absolutely. And I don't love that group overall, to be honest with you. And real quick on Wright, one thing I like about Wright is I actually think he's both Mostert and Achane's handcuff, which is kind of a unique situation. So if either of those guys gets hurt, I think he goes and does what the veteran or the guy ahead of him at least will mimic it to some degree. I like Estime for the long term. I just think Peyton likes a hard charging, no nonsense, get 5 when it's blocked for 3.5 or 4 type guy. And he's going to stick his face in and protect. And by all accounts, he's smart and will handle the offense quite well. So he's someone I've ended up with quite a bit. I will say, as a rule of thumb in these rookie drafts, I've tried to avoid this neighborhood of backs the best I can, because I'm just not that super impressed. But history shows Will Shipley, Tracy's, one of these guys is going to make an impact even this year. And the one that I probably end up most is Vidal with the Chargers. And again, just like the Jacobs contract, go look at the Dobbins contract. It's very minimal. I mean, it is not a ringing endorsement at all for his health this year, long term. And Gus Edwards is fine, but he's another one that is not dynamic. And with Patrick Ricard and the threat of Lamar Jackson, I don't think it's particularly difficult to be a running back in Baltimore the last couple of years, especially when you just put your head down and get what's there. So what's in front of Vidal isn't very scary to me whatsoever. And we know they're going to pound the rock, and they have a line now. I mean, they have a heck of a line. So if by chance he can get past those guys in his rookie year, which I don't think is insane, then you hit a home run.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Those two guys are really interesting to talk about, and they haven't came up the last couple episodes. Esteme, I'm right there with you. He's probably, of these group of guys, he's the guy I've ended up with the most, because I really do think there's an opportunity. I don't think Javonte Williams is going to be back after this year. No. I think that ship is sailed. And the history is shown, like you said, with Sean Payton, whether it's Chris Ivory, Kyrie Robinson, even, Mark Ingram obviously was more talented than those guys, but he always has
Same
that type
style.
of guy. And if he looks at Jaleel McLaughlin as his Darren Sproles or his Pierre Thomas type player, I think there's an opportunity for Estime. Word came out that they had it's a third round grade, which I'm sure a lot of teams always say things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But here or there, like they could have had him. There were some people who thought Estime could have went late round 3, early round 4. I think there's an opportunity there. And then the Vidal thing, I've been saying this, and it sounds like you like him in terms of that group, but don't love him. Would we really be surprised if Kamani Vidal is like a James Robinson type rookie year, and then they still go on next year and say, okay, yeah, it was a nice rookie year, but now Harbaugh's more established. He has his culture set, and then he goes and invests in a second-round running back or a first-round running back or free agent running back because he values the run game so much. I have a hard time thinking Kamani Vidal is the end game for what Jim Harbaugh wants out of his running back. So I think, in a weird way, Vidal, I think, offers more redraft value than all of these guys that we probably talked about. But Dynasty, I have a lot of questions because even if he's good, it could be Dameon Pierce year 1 and then not the right, they move on. Or like I said, I think the James Robinson comp, and then the following year they went and get, Travis Etienne. And I could totally see that. I just don't envision a scenario where Vidal is the long-term. And I think avoiding it as much as you can, probably the best way to go about it. So I'm right there with you.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's just a dynasty lesson for folks. Is a lot of these late round running backs or come from nowhere running backs that frankly just aren't super talented, but they get the opportunity. And it happens every season where week 10, one of these guys comes in with fresh legs and everybody else on the field's been beat up for a month and a half or 2 or 3 or whatever. And they look spry. And you think as a dynasty owner, man, I hit a home run. I got my RB1 or 2 in the 3rd round of my rookie draft. Well, teams don't see it like that. And there's so many backs available. And you probably know this 1,000 times better than me, but this upcoming class looks amazing from what the little I've studied. Teams are not going to be able to turn their nose up at them. So if you have a Vidal or any of these guys, maybe Tracy gets an opportunity and shines, he probably won't be the long-term answer or even the year 2 starter.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I think sometimes we overvalue that for sure, in dynasty and fantasy. Let's say into the pass catchers, and I haven't brought up tight ends in a while. So I'll ask one tight end question. We know Bowers is the clear top guy. And then Sinnett's going to get an opportunity there in Washington. They've been the 1-2 in everybody's, dynasty rankings in terms of the rookies or dynasty rookie drafts. Is there one guy after that, whether Jatavian Sanders in Carolina, Theo Johnson in New York, Eric All, who might not play much of this year in Cincinnati, Jared Wiley waiting in the wings with the Chiefs, or Cade Stover in Houston? Is there one of those guys you're like, I'm kind of intrigued with him? Maybe it's a tight end premium league. I stash him somewhere. Is there one of those Dave Fareed tight ends that intrigue you the most, whether the landing spot or the film eval prior to the draft?
A little interested in Johnson. I mean, considering the Giants don't have much in front of him and he is big and fast. But the two that really fit the bill to me are Eric All with Cincinnati and Jared Wiley with the Chiefs. And I know this is a long shot of happening, but what a landing spot for Wiley. I love the way he runs. He's just going to, so everyone knows I'm a Steeler guy. I mean, like in camp last year, Nick Herbig just followed TJ Watt around like his shadow. Like I'm sure Wiley will do the exact same thing with Kelsey. Soak every bit of information he possibly can up. Kelsey's not going to play at all in the preseason, and then they're going to limit his snaps. Could Wiley be like the tight end in the preseason with the most yardage, and then maybe turns into the 2? And by no means am I saying he's the next Kelsey, but I think there's a lot of ability there. I think he can get downfield. I think he has speed. I think he has good body control, and he's in a perfect Padawan situation.
Yeah, I never thought about this. So right now, as you were saying that, we could kind of almost see like a Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert situation here.
Yeah,
right?
That's a good one.
When I know Dallas Goedert had a better draft capital than Jared Wiley, but some people thought Wiley could sneak into the top 100. He fell to round 4, I think it was. So like we have that established, really good veteran there, but I think we're going to see some glimpses of Wiley, and it's going to have to be dynasty owners going to have a little patience, just like the Dallas Goedert, right? We had to have 3 years before we finally got that opportunity in Philadelphia, maybe even 4. Like I feel like it was a while before we really had to wait for him to get that real opportunity. And I'm not sure Kelsey's going to play more than 1 or 2. So we might not have to wait as long. But I think that's a kind of like an ideal situation, which I hadn't really thought of. But hearing you talk about like kind of like following him around and stuff makes a lot of sense there. So I think it's a good call. Let's turn this over to the pass catchers.
Okay.
Pre landing spots. How did you have the big three between Harrison, Neighbors, and Odunze just from film watching? Because they do really have different styles in terms of their best traits, their characteristics.
And I have them in that order. I know that's not super exciting. Most people do. But man, I think all three are phenomenal. And I haven't changed it with landing spots. I think Harrison and Neighbors are very, very special prospects. And I think Odunze, more often than not, would be the first receiver taken in his draft. And he's in a good spot. So I'm sure you've talked those guys to death.
Yep.
And I don't have a ton more to add to it. But I think all three are phenomenal. And if I were to do dynasty ranks right now, they would all be ranked extremely high on my receiver ranks, even against the veterans,
Yeah, I think that's spot on because I know I have them all high in my ranks. And even the Odunze stuff, I feel like people like get so worried about year one, but it's year one. Like Keenan Allen's gonna be there for 1 year probably. And like, and DJ, there's enough for DJ Moore. Just like people were so, worried when Calvin Ridley went to Atlanta and Julio was there. Like there was enough to go around, or Julio was there. Maybe Julio with Roddy White was there. Like there's always enough to go around if you have a good passing offense. If Caleb Williams is as good as we think, there's going to be enough for DJ Moore and for Rome Odunze, in a year from now for them to both be high-end producers.
Big time.
From that next group of guys, where I think the intrigue starts, right? The top three guys, they're all great. We could talk about them at length as we have. But when you look at a guy like Xavier Worthy going in Kansas City, obviously to frame a little bit of a concern, we've seen Kansas City draft other guys that haven't lived up to the potential at the wide receiver position. Mecole Hardman, Sky Moore. And then you have Ladd McConkey in this pristine situation with the Chargers losing most of their pass catchers. And then Brian Thomas, who I think has got probably the most development needed, ends up there with Trevor Lawrence, who you mentioned before. How do you kind of sort those guys? Worthy, McConkey, Thomas. You have a clear guy that you're like, yeah, he would be my clear number 4 in this pecking order after the big three, or to kind of really razor thin margin between those trio?
No, Thomas stands alone to me. I mean, he profiles and was a big time touchdown producer. And I don't think they're going to have to ask him to do a real diverse route tree. He actually could do a lot of George Pickens as a rookie type stuff, run and go routes, jump balls. And the thing is, I still love Lawrence. I think Lawrence is a buy low candidate in all formats, in all ways, shapes, or form, that he's going to take his game to a new level. And there are other guys around him, but nobody profiles like Thomas. And then real quick, I wanted to throw this out there because I hadn't thought of this situation, but it's much like the conversation we had about his rookie teammate with the Chargers. McConkey might catch 80 to 100 balls this year. I expect him to be the Chargers' number 1 receiver. And then they'll go sign T. Higgins or draft one in the first round. You know what I mean? That just screams the same situation to me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because he doesn't, and I think that conversation could even be had for another wide receiver, Jalen Polk in New England. He might get thrust into the mix, but I could totally see New England next year being like Carolina this year, right? We got to invest. We got to invest. We got to help the young quarterback out. And it's we go into this Ladd McConkey, who I think is going to catch, like you said, a lot of passes and can be a high volume guy in that regard. They're probably, when the dust settles, going to go out and invest in another weapon for Justin Herbert. Jim Harbaugh isn't just going to be like, oh, I'm just going to do it. He's not stupid. Jim Harbaugh's a smart guy, and he's a smart coach. And he knows he moved on from those guys because of contracts and age and injuries, and was like, okay, I'm gonna set the rest of the stuff in place, and then I'll go get playmakers and stuff like that. So I think you make a great point there. And Thomas is that guy that. Now let me ask you this from a scout, and I'll bring in another guy too. When as someone with that scouting background, a guy like Brian Thomas, who kind of exploded on this year, or another guy like Xavier Leggett, who was in college for his 5th year. And then that last year explosion, Xavier Leggett was unbelievable this year. Do you just kind of say I'm going to kind of tune out early career and just evaluate on what I see on film this year? How do you kind of take that and maybe just some thoughts on Xavier Leggett and what you think of him as a player and in Carolina?
It is a difficult thing to weigh. I mean, I'm sure LSU, Bama, Georgia, they have guys that are 5 stars ahead of him. So I think where you come from has something to do with it as well. I do like Leggett. I hear AJ Brown comparisons, which I think is far, far too rich for me. I think he's a lot more straight line-ish than Brown. I don't think he's as powerful, as explosive, can't drop his hips nearly as well. But I like him. I mean, I think he profiles for the NFL as a strong number 2, that has power and can get down the field. I know this isn't who you asked me about, but the guy I leave drafts the most with is Burton. I mean, I don't think Higgins is going to be back. Boyd's long gone. Burton, to me, is more talented than maybe Coleman, certainly Leggett, more than Roman Wilson, more than Polk. I mean, Burton, to me, is a potential steal for where he's going in rookie drafts.
Yeah, Burton's the guy I've gotten a lot because again, I think people overvalue immediate year 1 production, and like the truth of the matter is, we're not probably going to be using these guys much in dynasty, right off the bat. Like, and he's a guy that I think it's pretty understood that T. Higgins is not going to be back next year. No. It's just a matter of when he's no longer on the Bengals, and it's like, yeah, if Burton can keep his head on straight and stay out of trouble, he's going to be a guy that you're going to see glimpses of, and people are going to get really excited. His value is just going to keep, I think, increasing, even though the production might be hit or miss. I think his value is probably at its lowest right now than it's going to be half a year later, a full year later, obviously. And then when Higgins is not on the roster, I think now's the best time to get your hands on Burton. One other guy, you kind of mentioned Burton was going to be my question, like of those next guys who you ended up with the most in like. But one last question to end the show. Ricky Pearsall, thoughts on him and how much like his value, short-term, long-term, dramatically shifts if we get a Brandon Ayuk trade, as obviously he requested this week?
I don't see that happening. I mean, I think the Niners just hold way too many cards. They're trying to win the Super Bowl. There's no trade of Ayuk that would increase their chances of going to the Super Bowl. So I think Pearsall is going to be a real wait because they like Jennings a lot too. They rarely have 3 receivers on the field, and Jennings they gave money. So I think I don't think Debo will be back after this year, though. I mean, I think they're all in for now. Pearsall would be a injury replacement guy. They need somebody that can beat man coverage. That's not really Debo's bag. And I think Debo gets traded after the season. And Pearsall, kind of like Burton, but less. I mean, you're going to wait on him for a year. And then I think you'll be very, very happy. And just in Shanahan, I trust,
Yeah, and listen, you talked about the beginning of the show with quarterbacks, right? The environment. There's same thing with wide receivers. Certain skill sets that you just trust the environment, and that system there. I trust the system there that they would get the maximize out of Ricky Pearsall once he gets that opportunity. So I'm right there with you, Matt. Great stuff as always. I appreciate you hopping on the show, especially I know right before your vacation and heading to Steelers camp. Greatly appreciate it. Please let my audience. I'm sure that most of them follow you, but let them know where they can follow you. If anything you want to promote, push, plug, anything, floor is yours.
Thank you. This was fun. I'm glad we do this every year. Let's do it again. I'm Matt Williamson NFL on Twitter, and I started a YouTube page recently where you can just see all my YouTube videos, and just go give me a subscribe there. It's easy to find.
Guys, make sure you're following all of Matt's great work, checking out all the great content he produces, following him on Twitter, and all of that. So on behalf of Matt, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.